We will begin this afternoon with the refuge and bodhicitta prayer as usual. O sangye chedan soge chonam la chancho pardo dane chapsum che dage jinso Gibe sunam jirola penjira sanje drobar sho sangye chidan soge chonam la chancho pardo dane chapsum che dage jinso gibe sunam Drola penjir sanje drobar sho sangye chudan soge chonam la chancho pardo dane chapsum che dage jinso gibe sunam ge drola penjir Sanje drobar sho until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of being generous and so forth, may I become a Buddha to help beings until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of being generous and so forth, may I become a Buddha to help beings. Semjen tamje dewa dan dewe judan dembrar jurji donga da donga ji judan dawa jurji donga mebe dewa tamba dan minrawa jurji Nirin shadan nitan ralwe tanyon shambola nebra jurji. The Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the three times, who shows me directly my mind as Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted Guru. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. And now as we start today, please take a moment to consider your motivation. And often I've just been giving a rather formulaic version of rousing bodhicitta, but it's important to do this. It's important to think at the beginning, why are we actually participating in this session today? Why have you tuned in? And the fact that you're tuning in, if you're tuning on in YouTube, it's possible. I don't know how likely it is. It's possible that this video has just shown up in the play next list, and you're therefore watching the next video that comes up on YouTube. But mostly, I'm sure, I'd imagine that most people have just clicked on the link and said, "I'm going to listen to this." So why is it that you have done that? Just doing that and taking the time to turn on the computer and look at it, or to maybe you're looking on your phone, whatever, to open up the browser and look at this and watch and listen. And for those of you who've been listening regularly, there's actually a fair number of people who've been consistently listening since the beginning of this course. To do this regularly it takes a lot of, what do we say? Stick-to-itiveness. Especially when you're doing it over YouTube. It's harder to keep at it when you're in your own place. If you were here and able to be part of our studio audience, it would be easier for you to come every day. It's harder to miss lessons when you're in the studio audience because people can see that you're not there. But when you're at home, no one can tell that you're missing the lesson. So those of you who are actually watching right now are not missing this lesson, and this is actually a very good sign. So why is it that you are tuning in? So that's what we have to look at. So for that reason, we have to think about the motivation. So please think to yourself that we are doing this not just for temporary benefit in this lifetime. Frankly, you're not going to get much out of studying Abhidharma in worldly terms. You might be able to get a job in academia if you also go through all the hassle of getting a PhD, or if you already have a PhD. But we're not even certain how much benefit that is other than a paycheck. And if you're just doing it for satisfying curiosity, I suppose that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But really the idea is to do something that's going to benefit ourselves. And what's really going to benefit us is by taking the things that are taught in the Dharma and then bringing them into our being to improve ourselves. And why do we want to improve ourselves? We want to improve ourselves, of course, so that we're turned into somewhat better people in this lifetime, but that's kind of a limited goal. We also, if we really think about it, if we think about the teachings in the last chapter, particularly the teachings about the 12 links of interdependence, that talks about how it doesn't just end, it's going to go on. And so we can think about it. This cycle that we are in has no end unless we stop it. And so we have to do something to stop the cycle that we are on. This is what we call the motivation of the wish for liberation. Often it's translated as renunciation. The actual, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. I don't want to, excuse me. I don't want to sneeze right into the microphone and blow out anyone's speakers or anything like that. The reason that we call the word is the actual Tibetan word Ngejungi Sem. It's the wish for emancipation, to free yourself from the cycle of samsara. And we translate it often in English as renunciation, but the actual literal meaning of Ngeprajungwa means emancipation. Sempa means like wanting, so wanting liberation, wanting emancipation. So this is what this is one very good motivation that we can have in listening to them. The teachings such as this one, and this is the motivation of most of the masters of the Great Exposition School. But when we think about it, as we spoke about the other day, we want to have liberation because our suffering is painful, and so we want to be liberated from it. But we can also look and see other people's suffering, and see other people's suffering is painful, and they want to be liberated from it. And if we have compassion for them, then also seeing their suffering, seeing them experiencing pain is painful for us. And so in order to liberate ourselves from that pain, we also have to liberate other sentient beings. And so if we think in this way, this is bringing us towards the motivation of bodhicitta. If we want to liberate all sentient beings, how do we do this? The only way to do this, the only way to achieve that is to follow the footsteps of the Buddha Shakyamuni and to gather the accumulations, purify obscurations, and achieve Buddhahood. And in order to do that, we need to listen to the Dharma teachings, we need to contemplate them, we need to meditate upon them. And so please think to yourself that this is the reason why we are listening to and teaching these teachings today. So yesterday we finished the text of the 3rd chapter. And so today we should start the fourth of the text that we're speaking about, the Treasury of Abhidharma, the verses on the Treasury by Abhidharma by Vasubandhu, and as explained by the Ninth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje, has 8 chapters. And so the third chapter, the teachings on the world, we finished yesterday. Today we will start the teachings on karma. So if we think about it, actually one of the most important things that we can think about with the third chapter, just to go back and kind of take a little bit of a wrap-up with it first before we move on to the next chapter, is that basically it's presenting a variety of different situations that we could take rebirth in samsara, and showing how it is that a being goes from one to the next to the next. And one important thing we have to think about here is that I think it's pretty normal for people to assume that our next existence is going to be similar to our current existence, or maybe a little bit better. And it's quite possible that our existence is going to be quite different. Like when we talk about reincarnation in the popular press, I remember in the 1980s, there were a lot of newspaper articles one winter about the actress Shirley MacLaine remembering a previous rebirth as, I don't remember if it was Eleanor of Aquitaine herself or Joan of Arc or some medieval heroine queen sort of figure. And I suppose it's possible. But what happens is that we tend to think that our past experiences were more or less the same as we are, and we get really fixated on our gender and on being humans. And so we assume that, you know, if you're male now, then you kind of think that all of your births in the past have been male humans, and if you think you're female, there's a tendency to think that all your females have been female humans, but neither of these are certain. And we could have been anything. And we probably have been anything. And just looking at the actual odds, it's not good to be reborn human more than once. If you compare the number of human births in any given year to the number of animal births, then the chances of being born human are incredibly tiny, billions to 1, if you're leaving it up to fate, so to speak. So if we're going to do something to improve ourselves, we have to look at what are the causes of the birth in samsara. And so we go and we look at the 12 links of interdependence. We have ignorance, formation, and consciousness. That means ignorance is afflictions, formations is action or karma. Consciousness is the consciousness at the moment of birth. That's looking at it in terms of the previous lifetime. Or you can look at it in slightly more depth in terms of the expanding this lifetime and the future lifetimes. Then we've got craving, grasping, becoming, birth, and aging and death, and so forth. So craving is the affliction that kind of gets you interested. The grasping are the coarse emotions that really get you wrapped up in acting. Then there is becoming, is the actual action. Action is karma, and that karma causes birth, and birth causes aging and death. So if we want to avoid aging, death, and disappointment and sadness and fighting and lamentation and wailing and all the suffering, the heap of suffering of samsara, then we have to deal with karma. Right? So that's why the next chapter is karma. And so in the chapter on karma, the fourth chapter, so that's kind of like putting it together. If you want to know why is it, there are all these different worlds. The beginning of the chapter in the auto commentary is basically saying, what is the link? But how is it that all of these different worlds that we could be born in, how is it that they happen? And it says they were not created by a God who had an intention or who had previously formed an intention and then created a universe. They didn't happen by that. They happened out of being's karma. Here in the real side, sidetrack in Dharma Kirti's explanation of this. There's a lot of discussion how they actually are preceded by mind, because karma is preceded by mind. But they were not preceded by a creator God who has mind, because if you posit that there is a permanent creator God who creates the universe, then the universe we see arises in a succession. And so therefore, the creator God, if the creator God is a cause, would either have to, if the creator God is eternal, then that God would have to be creating all the time or never. Otherwise, the God would be changing from moment to moment, and therefore would not be permanent. At any rate, that's a little bit of a sidetrack. So here we are. What is it that creates the world? It is karma. So to go to the text of the area, which is on page 293 of the book, and so you have this on the handouts as well. The teachings on karma. The chapter in the commentary begins with a little bit of a homage and pledge to compose. It reads, "The illumining master, the karmika skilled in shining in the playful ocean-like skies of the land of snows, playing in vibrant compassion, I prostrate to him whose omniscience, and then." So here in the first line it says karmaka instead of karmapa. You're wondering, why does it say karmaka instead of karmapa? Well, in kind of a somewhat simplistic manner, it's not entirely simplistic. It's got a basis in Sanskrit grammar, but the Tibetans decided that in Tibetan you make a verb into a noun by adding pa on the end. And in Sanskrit, therefore, you would also do the same thing by adding a ka on the end, they say. Actually, in Sanskrit, the transformation is a lot more complicated than that. But, so they change, so they say when they want to call the Karmapa by the Karmapa's Sanskrit name, they call him Karmaka. Of course, whether that is actually a Sanskrit word is an entirely different question, but that's why it says Karmaka, because it's the Tibetan Sanskrit form of Karmapa. And then, from love and compassion for those whose six-legged winged intelligence could go to the ends of the skies of his unexcelled explanations, this short commentary of mine, whose cool rays make clear the Karmapa's intent, comes from the great ocean of the Abhidharma. So here we're comparing students to bees. Bees are diligent. They work hard. They collect pollen and nectar and they make honey, right? So that way we also do similar things ourselves. So here, the fourth area, the teachings on karma, has an explanation of the text of the area and a presentation of the area's name. So the explanation of the text of the area is 99% of the chapter. The presentation of the area's name is the last paragraph. The explanation of the text has three topics: how everything arises from karma. The second is understanding karma itself. And the third is teaching the synonyms of dharmas as a summary. So, how everything arises from karma. This says simply, from karma various worlds are born. What created the environment of the world and its inhabitants, sentient beings, described above? So we talked about the world of sentient beings and so forth. And here an important point that has to be made out is that world is not separate from us individually. This is like all the possibilities of ourselves. These are not just like some worlds for other people. These are situations that we have probably or almost certainly in past lifetimes taken birth in situations such as those. And if we do not do anything to interrupt it, we will continue to take birth in those sorts of situations. So the world, it's not here an academic thing. It's like this is all the possibilities for ourselves. And so that's why it's important for us to think about it. It was not created out of forethought by Ishvara or some other god. Ishvara here, actually, I thought that Ishvara was a name of a Sanskrit deity. And in a sense it is, but it's just like the word, when you speak with Hindus about God, they talk about God using the word God, the English word. When speaking about it in English. And then Ishvara is just the Sanskrit and Hindi word for God, basically, meaning a creator God. Now, of course, in Hinduism there are lots of gods, but when you talk about a creator God, when you're talking about a God who's creating the universe, that just means Ishvara. Sometimes they call him Maheshvara, which would be like the great God. But anyway, it just means God. Instead, from various virtuous and unvirtuous karmas, the environments, the worlds of and inhabitants of various happy and wretched, good and bad worlds are born. So if we're born in a good, pleasant experience where we have all the things we need, that comes out of our good karma. And we're born in a bad situation, that comes out of our bad karma. If we're born in kind of a mixed situation, it's because we've got a mixture of good and bad karma. So that's what this is talking about. So this is very important. It's just one line, but it's actually really important because we have to remember that we're not talking about some sort of academic exercise outside of ourselves. We're talking about our own actions. A few weeks ago, when the Gyalwang Karmapa was leading us all in the prayers for the pandemic to subside, he spent one day speaking a little bit, or he gave a few words about karma in one of his talks. And you can read it on the website. I don't remember which day it was, but it certainly was the day. It was the day when he was speaking at Chobe, so I don't remember if it was the 4th or 5th day. At any rate, you can look at the transcript online, and he said something very interesting. Karma is not fate. He didn't say it exactly like this. Karma is not fate. It doesn't mean that when you are born in some sort of world, when we are born as humans, born male, born female, born whatever you're born, that is not fate. That comes out of karma. Now what happens is that we worry a lot about our situation, the results of karma, where we are, what we can do with the results. Actually, what we need to look at are the causes. You can't do anything about the results. You were born human, you were born male, you were born female, or you were born in some indeterminate gender. Any one of those three. There isn't another option. And you were born in that situation. Once you've been born in that situation, you're born. Now the question is, what are you going to do about it? Being born there wasn't the product of it wasn't some god who plucked you. It wasn't like the Greek gods, like the Greeks had it, three sisters who put you there and then determined how long you would stay and cut your thread when it was done. It's not that. It's actions. Your actions that you do. So you look at your actions. So in other words, what we do is we look at the causes because we can change the causes. Not the causes of this life because it's already created. The causes of the future, and even the causes of the future in this lifetime. That's the whole point about karma. So karma gives us a lot of control. The world, in English, we use the word karma, the Sanskrit word, and on the one hand, this is okay because we don't really have the same ideas about action and results as they do in karma. But on the other hand, it's a little bit of a problem because we tend to think of karma as being something separate. You do an action and then you get karma. It's kind of like if you do an action, a good action, then your teacher gives you a gold star. And that's good. And if you do a bad action, then what does the teacher give you? They don't give you a gold star. They give you maybe a black square, I don't know. And the idea is what do teachers do? Maybe they don't give you anything because they don't want to hurt your feelings. Okay, they give you a lump of coal. I'm going to mix my Western metaphors. You either get a gold star or a lump of coal. Santa would bring you the lump of coal. And you've got this gold star or lump of coal that you carry around with you, and you've got like this bag, this invisible bag that's filled with gold stars or lumps of coal or maybe a mixture of the two. So when we use the word karma in English, we kind of think of karma as being some separate thing. You do an action and then you get karma, and then you have your karma until it ripens. But that's not it. The word karma and the Tibetan word le means action. You perform an action. That action is a cause that will lead to results in the future. Some results are immediate. Some results happen later. So you can see the immediate results, you can't see the later results. To give an example, it's like if you put a dam, if you have a little stream, say you have a nice wooded acre of land with a nice, beautiful stream running through it. And you decide you want a swimming hole, so you block up your pond, you block up your stream, and you stop the flow of water. The immediate result that you can see is that you've got a pond of water. What you don't see is what's going to change in the ecology of that woodlot over the next. The water flow has changed, so you don't see what's going to happen. There are animals that can't, so the whole ecology of that woodlot changes because you've blocked the stream, right? So it's similar. When you do an action, you can see some things that happen right away. You do an action, you do something that you want, and you see something, you want it, and you do something to get it. You get it, you think that's the result of the action. That's the immediate effect. But there's a future effect. You do something, you steal something that you want, you get caught and you go to prison. Is that the karmic result? Probably not. The karmic result is going to come even later. So they're like different results that come. And so we're looking at the sorts of causes and results in relation, because if we take control over our actions, we can take control over our rebirth and our destiny, so to speak. Destiny is not something fixed in Buddhism. It's not like fate. It's something that we have control. So these teachings on karma are an incredibly powerful tool for us to do, because from karma, various worlds are born. So do you want to create a good world for yourself to be in the future? Or do you want to create a bad world? That's the choice that we have in acting on karma. So that's why it's important to think about karma. Now, the topic of karma itself is really quite complex. And so the main part of the chapter is devoted towards teaching us the nature of karma itself. And that's this section, Understanding Karma Itself. This is 3 topics. The first is identifying karma. What is karma? The second is the presentation of karma. And the third is the meaning of karma as explained in the sutras. So here the presentation of karma means the presentation of karma as given by the Great Exposition School. And then the meaning of karma as explained in the sutras is slightly different. So that's why there are 2 different sections there. So the first section is identifying karma, and this has 3 points. It's classifying karma in 2. So this reads volition and what that results from karma. So if you just read this one line, it doesn't make sense. If you put it in the whole sentence, from karma, various worlds are born, volition and what that creates. So this refers to the types of karma. One is volition, and then the other is what is created from volition, which means action. So volition means, as it says here, what is karma like, you ask? If you classify it, there are 2 types. Volitional karma, that's volition, wanting to do something, and what that volition creates. Intended karma. So you have a volition, I want to have roast chicken, so I'm going to kill a chicken. I'm being hard on chickens this time, at least in my examples. And so then the intended karma is actually going out and chopping the chicken's head off and then roasting it. Right? So the volition is, I want it, I'm going to kill it, and then the intended karma is the action of killing and cooking. This is because it is said in the sutras, karma is twofold, volitional and intended karma. Intended karma is also classified in 2, so there are 3 types. So classifying intended karma in 2, we'd have karma of body and karma of speech. So that gives us 3. Volitional karma, karma of body, and karma of speech. So they're individual essences. Volition is mental karma, which creates the karma of body and speech. Of those three, the mental factor of volition is mental karma. So we have two mental factors, volition and intention. Volition is a little bit less specific. It's like, I want to do this. Intention is like specifically planning how you're going to do it and getting ready to do it. So it's just a little bit subtle difference between those. Volition is more general. I want that chicken. I want that roasted chicken, so I'm going to kill the chicken. And then intention is, I'm going to grab it and chop its head off. That which volition creates, intended karma, is the karma of body and the karma of speech. So karma, again, I'm using the word karma in English because it's the word that we all know, but it's actually the action of body and the action of speech. There is not anything about karma other than the action itself. That's the important point. So I'm going to repeat it 100 times until you're sick of me saying it over again. And then the third point here is perceptible or imperceptible karma. Those two are percepts and impercepts. So these two are they can either be perceptible karma or imperceptible. So these two means the actions of body and speech. They have perceptible forms, like a perceptible action of body would be killing the chicken. Okay? An imperceptible action of body is keeping the vow of not taking life, which prevents you from killing the chicken, right? A perceptible action of speech would be telling a lie. And the imperceptible action of speech would be such as keeping the vow to not tell falsehoods. Right? So the imperceptible here talks primarily about vows. Those of you who were in our class last year may remember our discussions about imperceptible forms. That's what we are talking about here. The imperceptible forms refers to vows, essentially. We will get to those tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow. Okay, so that's the understanding of karma itself. So basically we've got three things. We've got karma of mind or volition karma, karma of body, which is also intended karma, and then the second type of intended karma is karma of speech. So two of these are actual actions. One of them is the volition that motivates an action. Okay? The presentation of karma has three topics: classifying karma in two, then presentation of the general features of the three karmas, and the presentation of imperceptible karmas. So if we classify karma in two, there are two topics: perceptible and imperceptible. And the perceptible has 2 points: perceptible of body and perceptible of speech. Okay, so the perceptible of body is the first point, and it has first topic. It has 3 points. The first is identifying its essence according to the great exposition tradition. Bodily perceptible is shape. That means that what this is saying is that the perceptible actions of body are shape. What we're doing here, what the Great Exposition School is doing here, is we say, okay, a karma is a phenomenon. So if it's a phenomenon, what type of phenomena is it? If it falls in the 5 aggregates, where does it fall? If it falls in the 12 sense bases or the 18 elements, where does it fall? So we've got the perceptible of karma, the perceptible karma action of body. So what they're basically saying, it's shape. So it's something you can see with your eyes. When you can, imagine you've got someone who is prostrating with faith to the Buddha. You cannot see their faith. You can't see their motivation. You assume it's faith. Maybe they're doing it just to make themselves look good. Who knows? You can't tell. You can't see. But you can see the body moving. That's something that you can see. Now, so that's going to be a form, visual form. And when we look at visual forms, they basically can be divided into color and shape, according to the Great Exposition School. And this is where they get into trouble, according to the Sutra School. So it's got to be either color or shape. Well, is a prostration a color? You wouldn't really say that, but you can say that it is kind of the shape. But here's the interesting thing. It's not like an enduring shape. It's like a shape that happens over many moments. Because everything is arising and perishing in a moment. So it's like you've got, if you're making claymation, claymation animation, you're taking your little clay figures, you take a picture of them in one position, and then you take a picture of them in the next position, then you take the picture in the next position, and so forth. And as you do this, then you end up, when you play it forward at the appropriate speed, then it looks like you've got this figure actually doing an action. But it's not. It's actually just stop, 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 stop in every instant. Because everything is instantaneous or is momentary. So everything arises and perishes in every moment. Just from the mere fact that arises at that same time, immediately upon arising, things perish. The atoms arise and come together and they perish. Arise and come together and perish. The first moment of atoms perishes, is the cause to make the second moment of atoms rising and perishing. It's like different things. So it's like if we take our claymation analogy here, it's not like you take the same claymation figure and move it around. It's like you're making a new claymation figure for every single step in the whole thing. You've got claymation figure for the first frame. Then you make an entirely separate claymation figure for the second frame. Then you take an entirely separate claymation figure for the third frame. It's like they're rising and perishing. You take that one frame and the first one disappears. Then you have to make a next one for the next frame. You take that frame and then the claymation figure disappears. Of course, it doesn't happen that way with claymation. But what it's saying is that things are arising and perishing in every moment. Something arises, it perishes. The next moment, there's something that arises and perishes. And when you've got things that look like they are enduring over time, it's just that the similarity of what arises and perishes in every moment confuses us or tricks us into thinking that there is continuity over time. For example, if you look at my hand, which I'm waving right here, the atoms, in my hand and arm are coming together and falling apart in every moment. So the instant, we talked about yesterday, this is the 13 milliseconds that we talked about in the units of time. Maybe that's even a little bit slow if we look at it in terms of modern physics. Maybe we could go down and say the units of Planck time. Whatever unit you want to use, it's fine. But there's some sort of moment where the atoms come together. You've got your earth, water, fire, air, form, scent, taste, and touch, the 8 different types of substances coming together, and a bunch of them doing it together in enough places that it ends up looking like my hand. Now, those don't endure. They immediately fall apart. And because they immediately fall apart, new ones can happen. So like when I move my hand, there's some here, and then I move. That's what allows me to move my hand. It's actually different particles happening over and over again. So when I have that cleaver in my hand and I'm taking that chicken and chopping its head off, poor chicken, that is just the shape of all of those going, arising and perishing, arising and perishing. And this is motivated by mind, so I'm using a horrible example. Wangchuk Dorje uses a much nicer example. When the mind thinks, I will prostrate, bodily perceptible actions such as prostrating and joining on palms is proposed to be shaped. So this is the great exposition tradition. And there are some good things to think about it. One of the things that happens here, and I'm going to digress. I'm having a lot of digressions today. One of the things that happens is that we really think too much, and we create huge stories about everything. So when you look at things in terms of how it is described in the Abhidharma, breaking everything down into their constituents, you've got your volition, and then you don't even bother to look at the content of the volition, you just look at it, virtuous, unvirtuous, or neutral. So when you've got a volition, all you have to do, you don't have to worry about what sort of story led to you to having that volition. You just check, is it virtuous, neutral, or unvirtuous? And if it's virtuous, you do it. If it's unvirtuous, you don't do it. No need to think. If it's neutral, better to do something virtuous if you have a choice. But sometimes you just have to do, neutral things like going to the bathroom and eating food. Right? So there are neutral things that you have to do. But basically, with the volition, it gets very simple. There's no longer any soap opera that leads up to that, decision. You don't have to worry about it. And this is so liberating when you think about it. You don't have to worry about your past. You just have to worry about what is your motivation at that moment. It makes it much easier. And then when you're thinking about the action, and we get these huge stories about what we did and why we did and view it with such meaning and all this, it's just, you did something, frankly. It was a shape. So you don't have to worry about it. So you take these and you reduce things, and then that really just cuts out a whole lot of opportunity for all those mental gymnastics and gyrations that we go through and that get us into a lot of trouble. And I was speaking about it with a few days ago, and I think I probably got myself into trouble back then. I'm going to do it again. It's that we Westerners are incredibly complicated. And one of the reasons is that we love to create stories about everything. So if you take the teachings in here and you kind of break it down, you're really careful about it. This is something that they're really good about doing in the Theravada practice, which is essentially the same practice as the Great Exposition, looking at things on a very kind of microscopic level. So you just look at it carefully. What's happening in your mind? What's happening in your body? Know what's happening. So here, when you do this, then you've got less of that stuff going on in your head. It makes it all much simpler. So here we're going to say, therefore, that the perceptible actions of body are shape according to the Great Exposition school. Now here's the problem, is that you might think to yourself that the shape, that it's not just shape, because you can see that an action lasts over time. So there was a Buddhist school called the Vatsiputriya school, and the Vatsiputriya school had a number of unorthodox positions. And one of their unorthodox positions is that they didn't have that same conception of the momentary nature of phenomena as the other Buddhist schools. And they talked about things being able to move from one place to another. Like when you move, like if I were to get up off of this throne and to walk away, it would be my body that is moving. That action would be able to move. Instead of breaking it down into each tiny moment, they say that there is motion. And this is also echoed in the teachings of other non-Buddhist schools as well. In particular, in this section, it's not brought out so clearly in Wangchuk Dorje's commentary, but there are also some positions of the non-Buddhist Vaisheshika school. So these are different positions that people had. So here, Vasubandhu refutes them, and we get the short version here. It is not movement, since composites are momentary as they perish. So in the second point here is the refuting the doubts of the Vatsiputriya school. It is not movement, since composites are momentary as they perish. Nothing can happen without cause. The cause would become the destroyer. So followers of the Vatsiputriya school agree that some composites, such as rainstorms or flames, are momentary, but mostly do not assert momentary impermanence. So this is one of the key features of most schools of Buddhism, is that composite phenomena arise and perish in every moment. The moment that it arises, it naturally perishes. That perishing is a natural part, that there is no separate thing that makes something perish. By the fact of arising, it immediately The moment it's there, it perishes. Arises and perishes, arises and perishes, and then the next thing arises and perishes. And because of there being a continuum of those things, when the rising and perishing, in that process they act as the cause of the next atoms to rise and perish, and then that acts as the cause of the next atoms to rise and perish, and so forth. In and out, so basically coming in and out of existence, arising and perishing at every moment. This is a standard Buddhist teaching that we find in most schools of Buddhism except for the Vasubandhu school. It is part of the Mahayana school of Buddhism too. It is also taught in the Vajrayana, whatever type of Buddhism you're talking about. It's an important teaching. But the Vasubandhu school says it's not. So therefore, they say, perceptible actions of body are not impermanent because they're actions that move the body from one location to another. So this could be walking, or when you're talking about taking that cleaver and chopping the head off of the chicken, you've got your action of body. Well, I'm using a bad example. And when you're doing the action of prostration, why am I only talking about chickens? When you do the prostration, you've got that action of body that goes through. So they say that it's an enduring action that lasts over time. And Vasubandhu says, this is illogical. It, that is the karma or the action of the body, is not movement to another location without ceasing, since it is composite, like cognition and so forth. So the analogy here is that we see that cognition, when you have a thought that comes into your mind, it stops. You have a feeling in your mind, it stops. Now, it might perpetuate itself for a while, but if you actually look at it carefully, you'll see that that's actually just a whole bunch of subsequent thoughts going one after another, one after another, one after another, in kind of a cycle. It spirals out of control, and you might think of it all as being one thought, but actually it's just a lot of separate thoughts happening one after another, separate cognitions happening instantaneously. And those cognitions cease on themselves, on their own. When you feel doubt, it doesn't require, you don't have to have some sort of cognition of certainty to stop that doubt. You feel doubt, and then you get distracted by something else, and that doubt just goes away on its own. It ceases, because you only have one thought at a time. So you can't have the two thoughts together. They don't actually come into contact. The later thought can't have anything to do with the previous thought. It's just at a separate time. So it doesn't contact it. So there's no way that it can actually stop it. It's that thought stops on its own. This is a really important thing when we're thinking about, this is again a little bit of a thing, when you're thinking a little bit of a digression, when we're thinking about how our minds work, if we don't perpetuate our thoughts, they will cease on their own. This is a really important point. When you feel angry at someone and that anger stays there, what actually is not, that anger is not staying there. It's that in your thinking process, you are continually perpetuating the anger from moment to moment to moment to moment to moment. And when you finally let go and let it stop actively perpetuating it, it stops on its own. Same with attachment. You let it stops, because it's the nature of cognition to stop. Everything ceases on its own. Similarly with action. To prove that this is pervasively, that is necessarily true, all composites are, without a doubt, momentary phenomena that are destroyed immediately upon arising. And really, rather than saying destroyed, it probably would be better to say perish. Something arises and it perishes. It's not destroyed because it doesn't need anything else to destroy it. It just needs to be, it just perishes on its own. There's no other cause that makes something perish. It arises and perishes naturally. As without a doubt they immediately perish, independent of other causes and conditions. So you don't need another thing to make something stop. It falls apart on its own. The disintegration of composites does not depend upon some other causes because, so the reason why it doesn't depend on other causes is nothing that depends on a cause can happen without a cause. But lightning and so on are directly seen to perish without any cause at all. Now, I have to admit that when I translated this line, these sentences, and I probably went over it a bunch of times, I don't think I understood them. It's a very difficult idea. And when I look at other translators, I see they didn't understand it either. The only difference is that I just out of luck happened to get it right when I translated it. I don't know. It's like I didn't, it's hard to understand this idea. The point that's being brought up here is when you say, if you have perishing, if you say that that is a separate action than arising, then it would need a cause. But we see that there are instances of things that perish without another cause. The example given in the text is lightning. Lightning occurs and then it stops without anything else stopping it. Another example is cognition. It arises and it stops on its own. You don't need another cause. So, because there is no need for another cause for it to cease, therefore, perishing is not a separate action. The arising and the perishing happen basically together. It's like you've got that infinitesimal moment when things arise, and in that same moment, as they're arising, they're perishing. The rising and perishing are not separate things, in a sense. So, when we say nothing can happen without a cause, what in particular we're saying is that perishing, if it were a separate thing, could not happen if it were a separate thing, unless it had a separate cause. So perishing and arising are not separate. So when we're talking about an action, if you say that the action of prostration is all one thing that has a beginning and an end, there would have to be some cause for it to end. And if it's that way for one thing to perish, for one thing to cease, then it would not be that. Basically, what we mean by something perishing or something ceasing is that it just stops being. And stopping being is an absence. And so therefore, because it's an absence, it doesn't need a cause. It's there for a moment and then it's gone. And we call that, it's not the then it's gone, give that the name ceasing or perishing. Actually, there's nothing happening. Just sort of like a spark for a moment and then it's gone. In that case, there are things such as lightning that are like that, but we can see that hammers and such are the cause of destruction of clay jugs and so forth, you say. So you can say, well, actually, we can see that the opponent here is saying, well, that's not the case, because we can see that some things can be destroyed by another cause of destruction. So if you have a clay jug and you take a hammer and you smash it, the hammer would be a cause of its destruction. But if that were so, if you had to have a separate cause, we can also then, cause of that destruction, then that cause would have to be kind of a different sort of thing than the cause that creates it. Because creating and destroying are different, right? So you wouldn't have the same sort of thing that creates something and that destroys it. That's what this last line of the verse, the cause would become the destroyer, is speaking about. The cause that creates something could not be the cause that destroys or that causes it to perish. If that were so, it says here, we're down at the last 3 lines of 295. If that were so, the cause of the red color of a clay jug that is heated, fire, would become the destroyer of the red color of the heated jug. It would follow that the creator was also the destroyer. So here the analogy is, when you have a clay jug that at first is kind of just the brown color of clay, you put it in fire, or I guess you'd put it in the kiln, and as you fire it, the color of the clay changes to red. So the fire is the cause of the red color. But what happens if you leave the clay jug in the kiln too long? And now it's been way too long since I have ever been in a pottery class when I was a child. And they never let us leave our cups in the kiln too long anyway, so I wouldn't know exactly what happens, but I think that what happens is that the red, what this text says is like the red color of the clay cup changes. Maybe it all becomes white because it's overcharred, or maybe it turns black. I don't know what color it changes, but it no longer is red, according to this analogy. Another analogy that's also given in the auto commentaries, it's like when you're cooking. Steak. You've got your steak and you put it on the grill. And when you cook it, at first it's all raw the whole way through, all red. And then you cook it to a certain point and it's rare. So the cause of the steak being rare is the heat, the gas flame. But if you leave, so that is the cause, and that does not make the rare quality of the steak is caused by that, right? That's the cause. So that could not be the cause of that rare quality to perish, could it? But we all know that if you leave it on for a few more minutes, then that rare steak is going to turn into medium. Then if you leave it on longer, then that medium steak is going to turn into well done. And if you leave it on even longer than that, it's going to turn into charbroil, just charred all the way through. So we can see that that heat is not the cause that would bring it to that. The cause of the rareness, the heat, is also the cause of the destruction. So this is a point to saying that actually that there is not a separate cause for the destruction for something to perish. The rare quality of that steak doesn't perish because of the heat. It just perishes because it's impermanent. Everything is always changing because they're impermanent. So that's kind of a difficult passage, and that's much longer than in the auto commentary. So the next topic is this in terms of the presentation of the Sutra school, because the Sutra school says, wait a minute, how can you really say that karma is shape? So the tradition of the Sutra school says two would perceive it, not in particles. The Sutra school holds that shape does not exist substantially because when it is destroyed, there is no mind that perceives it, just as with a vase. So like when you take a shape apart, you can't perceive it. There's nothing there. Actually, there's no substantial. So here, this came up in the first chapter of the Treasury, where it speaks about the great exposition tradition. We present form and shape and color as being the two types of form. The Sutra school says that shape cannot be a type of form because it doesn't exist substantially in the atoms that make up form. So like say you have a conglomeration of enough atoms to make a perceptible thing. It doesn't have any shape that you can perceive yet. The Sutra school is essentially saying if you put enough of them together and you put them together in kind of a line, then it ends up being long. If you put them together and it's high, then it's tall. If you put them together and they're all low, then it's short. But there is no separate sort of shape independent of those atoms. And the reason they say that is if shape were to exist, that means if shape were to exist ultimately, we aren't talking about ultimate existence, not relative existence. In other words, the Sutra school is saying that shape is a conceptual idea that we project upon the atoms. Then the two faculties of body and eye would both perceive it because the eye would see shape directly and know it, and also when the body faculty touches it, a cognition that thinks long or so forth would occur. So in the Great Exposition School, shape is a category of form, of visual form, the eye. So we go the aggregate of form, and then the aggregate of form has 10 different distinctions. One of them is form, that we mean visual form, and that includes shape and color. So this is only perceived by the eye, says the Great Exposition School. When you touch something, you only can feel a little bit of it, so that's not feeling the shape, they say. Shape is things like being rough or smooth or even or uneven or things like that. But the Sutra school is saying that actually when you touch something, like if you touch this, you can feel, oh, that's long. This is the short way when you touch things, right? So that's the Sutra school saying that shape is therefore not substantially present in that. One cannot agree because it would sense us to have multiple faculties, and the correspondences between the sense bases and the substances would be weakened. So the idea here is that when you have a particular sense base, like you have form, visual form, and touch, they're separate things that are perceived by different faculties. What you're seeing and what you touch and what you feel when you touch are different, is what they're saying. And this is why they say that the particles, as we talked about in the second chapter last year, all particles have the eight different types of substance come together, and air, earth, water, fire, air forms scent, taste, and touch. So form and touch are different qualities according to to this presentation. And so they have to be separate because they're perceived by separate faculties. Now, some of you out there may well be thinking, well, that makes sense. Of course, you're seeing the same thing. When you are looking at a form, say you're looking at my glasses case, you are seeing it. And if you were touching it, you would feel it. I think I'm the only one who's experiencing touching it right now. But if there's something, you can see something. You can take your own glasses case or whatever else you have, and you can say, I can see it and I touch it, and I'm actually feeling the same atoms, you say. Even when we look at it in terms of scientific, we're actually feeling and seeing different things, because when you are seeing, you are not seeing the atoms. You are, according to physics, seeing the light that is reflected off the atoms. When you are touching, you're not even touching, actually. It just feels like you're touching. I don't know how it works in touching, but that's not the light that you're touching. That's not the light that is stimulating those, what are they called? Dendrites or whatever they're called, the sensory receptors that you have in your hand. Those don't respond to light. They respond to touch, whatever that happens to be. And I have so little knowledge of science that I can't remember what it's called. You might think, well, but when you smell if you maybe not a glasses case, maybe flowers, that's better. If you smell your flowers, you can smell the flowers. That's your smelling atoms. But those are different atoms than the ones that the light reflected off. And if you touch your flowers and you feel atoms, those are different atoms than the ones that make them into your nose. And they're and very likely different. The ones that you're actually touching with your fingers may not be the ones that would trigger the chemical receptors in your nose. So it actually makes a lot of sense that you have different faculties responding to different types of substance. Now, whether you say there are 8 basic types of substance or not is a different matter. At any rate, it's not as crazy an idea as you might first think. So any existing obstructive form at all must exist in atoms that are aggregated. Long and other such shapes do not substantially exist because there is not any such thing in the particles and because atoms have no parts. So basically we're saying that an atom is it has no parts. It can't have long or short, but when you put enough of them together, then you get a shape. If they happen to extend in the shape of a square, you've got a square. If they happen to extend in a circle, you've got a circle. But it's not in the particles themselves, but just the configuration that they find themselves in. At this point, there are many arguments and counter-arguments between the Great Exposition and Sutra schools that's presented in the Auto commentary and other commentaries, but I shall not go into them here. Wangchuk Dorje didn't go into them. I went into them a little bit. The important point here is that when we're taking things about and we're bringing them down, we're trying to bring them down to kind of the smallest thing and try to break it down to what it is. And so the Great Exposition School is breaking it down into form, 5 aggregates. That's a visual, so when you do an action of body, it's something you can see, so therefore they're saying it's visual form. And so when you take that and you do this in terms of just the daily practice, and in terms of actually thinking about how you live it in your daily life, if you actually start thinking about things in that terms, then it helps us keep from spiraling off into too many thoughts. You sort of reduce things, and that makes it easier to deal with. Now, in the Sutra school, they talk about karma differently. When they talk about karma as karma of the body, they talk about physical actions that are motivated by volition. So that's a little bit different presentation. It also has its benefit. But here, the whole point is that you're trying to reduce it rather than have all the other things that go on with it. And then the next point, the last one we'll cover today, is perceptible of speech. Perceptible speech is sound. So when you talk about perceptible, a perceptible action of speech is the sound that you can hear. Perceptible karma of speech is sound that has the nature of speech, because it makes the desire that motivates the speaker to talk perceptible to others. So it's just the sound, it's just there's nothing else. There's nothing else to it. In the Great Exposition, we talk about communicative speech or signifying speech as being names, phonemes, and phrases and such. But here, the actual action, is the sound. It's the sound that is the action. So again, reducing it down. So you don't need to think about it too much. It's all just sound. So that is enough for this afternoon. So let's please now dedicate the merit of teaching and listening to the Dharma to the benefit of all sentient beings. O Sanam Deye Tham Je Simbani Tomne Nye Bedranam Pam Chene Kyegana Chibarla Trombai Sibetzoledro Wadro Wansho. Thank you.